so much of the messaging that we are getting and that our kids and our families are getting is all about our feelings and feeling good and making ourselves happy and
Mhm.
and emotionalism. And it's almost like we have elevated our emotions above the truth. We've elevated our emotions. If it feels good, it must be right.
Hey everyone, this is Yvette Hampton. Welcome back to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast. It's Wednesday, or maybe Saturday, whatever day it is you're listening to this. It's airing on Wednesday. But if you are listening to this on Wednesday and you missed our conversation on Monday, go back and listen to that. We are talking this week about logic and about learning how to think well. And it's so important for us as Christians, as humans, as adults, to know how to be good thinkers and then to be able to pass that on to our kids. But before we jump back in, I want to thank our sponsor again, CTC Math. If you guys are looking for a great math curriculum, go to ctcmath.com. Try them out for free, ctcmath.com. All right, Kathy, we are back and we're talking about, Monday we ended talking about critical thinking. We were talking about how to define logical fallacy and a fallacy is an error in thinking. We talked about that. We talked about bias and cognitive bias and what that means. And then we talked also about propaganda and what that looks like in the world that we live in. And we gave a couple of examples, but can you give us some more examples of critical thinking?
Absolutely. Okay. So here's one and I love to use simple examples for people to get the concept and then bring it into real life, into how this is showing up in society. So let me just start with, I'm going to start with one that is called, and I'm going to just give you the easy one. I won't
Okay.
do the test and say, can you guess what this is? So,
thank you.
Yes. One of the logical fallacies is called equivocation. So equivocation is when you change the meaning or the definition of a word or a phrase in the middle of a sentence. Okay. Have you ever seen a sign on the billboard? Like say maybe they're trying to get people to stop smoking and the billboard will say, if you're looking for a sign to stop smoking, this is it. Okay, That's equivocation of the word sign. They're using it to mean a literal like sign on the side of the road, but also kind of as a sign or a signal to us, like, what's my sign that I should do this? They're using it in two different ways. A lot of jokes and puns come from this, and so they can be very funny. But they can also be very dangerous. Here's one of the big equivocations that has, I know for me, I have seen come into play in the last, I will say just 5 years, maybe even more so in the last 3. And it is the word racism. Okay. Racism, especially if you go back and you read Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, his definition, and I think the traditional definition of the word racism is when you treat somebody differently based on the color of their skin. And the whole point was you shouldn't do that, right? God says that we're all created in his image. We should all be treated the same way. We shouldn't treat people differently based on the color of their skin. Well, that definition has now changed. Now, the definition of racism is if you don't treat somebody differently or uniquely or special because of the color of their skin.
Right.
So, can you imagine? I mean, and we have seen this conversation play out over the last couple of years of you've got two different generations or people using two different definitions of this word, trying to have an argument or a conversation, and the meaning of the word has completely changed. And people don't even realize that it has changed. They don't even realize they're using the word with different meanings and it's causing frustration. And there's all these policies being made around it now and it doesn't make sense. And this is why. It's because the word itself, the meaning of it has been changed.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I never have actually even thought about the specific meaning of that word and what it was first intended to be and what it has become today. So that's interesting.
Right.
That's really
interesting. Here's another one, ad hominem. So an ad hominem attack, it's a Latin word that just means to the man, right? So basically an ad hominem attack is when you're attacking the person, their character, or maybe personal traits about that person, rather than actually disproving their argument. So we saw this a lot during the Trump administration, right? Whatever Donald Trump would say, or his wife Melania would say, they would get attacked. It was so easy just to call Donald Trump the orange man or
Right.
Cheeto, right? Or something like that. So it's picking up this, one characteristic about him and calling names essentially without even looking at, well, is what he said, are the things that he's saying, are they actually true? Are they good?
Mhm.
Well, they just discounted him. And same thing happened to Melania. Whenever she would try to say something, what did she get attacked for? Her accent, right? She is not a native,
or
English
the baseball
speaker.
cap that she wore, or
Right. And none of it. So it was all, it's, just kind of attacking the person rather than actually looking at what they're saying and saying, is there merit to this? Is there value? Is it true?
Mm-hmm. So in the Fallacy Detective, I know they talk about all of these different fallacies, and there's names for so many different ones. And it's fascinating. Like you said, like I never knew. I mean, one, I had never even understood that fallacy was really a thing. I mean, I know, of course, people have wrong thinking, but that you could study different fallacies. And the book is absolutely fascinating. I mean, again, Kathy, mentioned it. It's called The Fallacy Detective. And as a matter of fact, we just recently, Caleb Schrader was on the podcast and he talked about this book as well. So we'll put a link to this book in the show notes, of course, so you guys can get a hold of it. But it's a fun book to read. Yes. Because you just read this one with your kids. This is not a book that you want to hand to your kids and say, here, read on your own. This is like a good dinner time book you guys can read together, as a family, and start recognizing how to understand good fallacy and recognize what each of the different ones are. Cause it's an absolutely amazing book.
Well, and the thing that I've been amazed with as I've been researching for my podcast is how many there are. Cause the book, the Fallacy Detective is such a good introduction, and it talks about 38 fallacies. I have now come up with a list of over 150.
Really?
Because
wow.
I'm like, I want to do a little episode on each one. I'm like, there's a lot of them. It's kind of crazy how many are out there. I'm with you. I can't highly enough recommend families to go through that book together.
Yeah. Do you talk about the red herring fallacy? Because that's something that you often, you'll hear people say, and I never understood what that was until this book. I'll hear people say, oh, that's a red herring. I'm like, oh, I don't even know what they're talking about. I don't know what that means.
Yes.
Because I think that's probably the most common one we hear about, right?
We see it a lot. I mean, we see it, especially if you're looking at political debates or even people on the news. But a red herring is, and I'll explain the background to it. But basically, a red herring happens when somebody asks a question or is supposed to be talking about a topic and they answer with something that is completely off topic. They don't even address the original thing. They just answer with some other, who knows? It could be crazy. It could be most likely completely irrelevant. Here's where that fallacy comes from. At one point, the dog trainers, people who are training dogs to be like hunting dogs, tracking dogs, what they would do is they would put a dog on a scent. Like say this dog is hunting, I don't know, turkeys, right? I don't train dogs to hunt. So let's say he's training a dog to hunt turkeys. They would put the dog on a scent trail, and then they would take a rotten fish. A red herring is a fish. It's just a stinky fish. And they would take the red herring and kind of like rub it along that trail, kind of across the turkey trail, going off in another direction. And it was a test for the dogs to see if the dogs would take the new scent or if they would stay on the original scent for the turkeys. And so that's why a red herring is something that's designed to get you completely off track on something that has nothing to do with what it was that you were originally trying to do.
Yeah. So interesting. We're going to break. We'll be right back.
What we do at IEW is break through the noise of the grammar and the writing prompts, and we say, this is what you do, step by step. And I've witnessed it over and over again, both watching Andrew teach and hearing from parents, this is the best writing program. We've made it so easy and made it really affordable. So any mom can teach writing to their children using our course, and we guarantee it.
To try 3 weeks of free lessons, visit IEW.com. We are back with Kathy Gibbens. So let's talk really quickly about schools, because this is not something, and you and I talked about this at the beginning of Monday's episode. We were never taught this in school. And I went to, like I said, I went to a private school. I went to a Christian school my whole life.
Yeah, I did too.
And I was never taught anything about how to think. Again, I was always just taught like what to think, and I was never taught critical thinking. Why is this not taught in schools today?
So
or even in the past?
Yes. Okay. So this is a fascinating topic because it did used to be at one point, it did used to be taught in schools. You know, logical thinking was very much valued. The one of the people that we tend to think as the originator of logic is Aristotle. So we're talking like thousands of years ago, right? This has been around. But let's bring it up to kind of more modern times and how did we get to this place? So it begins back with the Prussian army. So the end of the 1700s, beginning of the 1800s, Prussia was a little country kind of where Germany is at right now, okay? And in the early 1800s, the Prussian army was world famous for having really, really good soldiers. Prussia was a dictatorship, and this was kind of their economy. Their economy was built on soldiers that they would actually rent out to other countries. So if some other country was having war, get a Prussian soldier because you are kind of guaranteed a win because they were just that good. Interestingly, there were Prussian soldiers on both sides of the Revolutionary War, which I think is so fascinating to me. Yeah. So very interesting. Now, in Prussia, all behavior was controlled by the dictators, by authorities. They despised free will because free will makes for bad soldiers. And remember, their whole economy was built on kind of this war machine, and you have to have good soldiers in order to, do that. Well, in 1806, Prussia had suffered a devastating loss to Napoleon. Right? There was this battle that it almost destroyed their reputation as a military, which if that happened, the country crumbles, right? Because this was their primary way that they made money was by renting out their soldiers, essentially. And so they were like, okay, we have to look into this. So they assigned, scholars and politicians and whatnot to look into it and find out what happened. Why did we lose this battle in such a devastating way? And what they found, the problem was that the soldiers were thinking for themselves and they were choosing which orders they were going to obey. They were choosing which generals or which leaders they were going to listen to. And that caused a lack of discipline, lack of obedience. And if you have soldiers who are not following the orders, it's not good. Like that is one place where you really do want soldiers, you want them, kind of following orders. So they ordered the scholars of Prussia to develop a system that would end any possibility of this happening again, because they couldn't have this, right? So they said, okay, well, where are we getting this, group of men to join this army? Well, it's from our population, the general population, and their, young kids coming in. So they said, well, what can we do to make sure that these young kids who are, coming into their teenage years, late teens and joining this army won't disobey and they'll obey the orders that we give them. And so the result was the very first mandatory government school system. And guess what? It worked. They designed this school system to kind of be like a conveyor belt. This is the school system that we are all familiar with now.
Right.
Okay, we get the kids early and we train them, and there's very specific things that we're training them to do and to not do. And yes, we're teaching them along the way, but the whole purpose for the way the system was designed was to spit out good workers that would not think for themselves. And guess what? It worked. So this word got out, right? Word gets out. Hey, they've got this new thing over there in Prussia that they're doing. It's working. It's producing these soldiers. It's producing really good workers that will listen to their boss, that will be obedient. And so the whole world came and said, show us what you're doing. Horace Mann, a lot of people might be familiar with that name. He is the person from the United States who went and brought this system back to the United States. And interestingly, they didn't want it here in the United States. The people, the parents, the families didn't want it. Even there were some schools, even in Massachusetts, where the families showed up with guns to the schoolhouse saying, no, we do not want this system in our schools. And of course, we know the story that they lost, and
Yeah.
that is the system that we have. And the whole point of it was to create quote unquote obedient school, and
Yep.
to create the factory model school where we put you on
Hmm.
this conveyor belt and you are moved through, and you are not taught to think. You are
Yeah.
actually taught to be able to obey orders,
Hmm.
and because that's what we want. Because a a people group, a country who know how to think for themselves are not easily controlled. And governments realize that they want people who they can easily control. They want people who they can manipulate. They want people who
Yep.
don't know how to think for themselves for that reason. And so, guess what? It's not taught in schools.
Right.
But guess who still does get taught this? Is the
Homeschoolers.
well, homeschoolers, yes. Come on, guys. Homeschoolers and the children of the elite. They go to
Yeah.
schools where they actually still teach this, because they're
Mm.
in their mind, they're raising the next generation who are going to control the masses
Right.
of people who don't know how to think. And so,
Right.
and the thing is, it's very simple. It's very simple. It's very fun. And if you teach your kids this, they will forever have this skill and be impossible to fool.
Yeah. Is your podcast, I've listened to a few episodes, and the ones that I've heard definitely are good for kids, but is this a podcast that would be good for kids to listen to with their parents
Yes.
as we learn to recognize these fallacies?
Absolutely. In my mind, I'm talking to middle and high schoolers in my mind.
Okay.
Now, not to say that like a fifth, sixth, grader
Right.
couldn't listen to it and get it. Absolutely. But that's
Sure.
kind of that's kind of who I'm thinking of in my mind. But yes, it is rated G.
Yeah.
Safe for
Okay.
families.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was actually, as you're talking, I'm thinking, and I actually just made myself a note. I thought, I think I'm going to include this in Brooklyn, because she's going into 11th grade this year. I think I'm going
yes,
to include
yeah.
this in her curriculum for the year, of having her listen to your podcast, because she's an
Yay,
auditory
I would love
listener
it.
or auditory learner anyway.
Yeah.
And this would be so good for her too, because we've been through part of the Fallacy Detective book. We haven't gone through the whole thing yet. We'll finish that this year.
Yeah.
But this would be fantastic for her.
Oh, I'd
so
love
you
to
have
have
so
her
much
listen.
good information. So let me ask you this. What are the biggest threats? I mean, are there threats to thinking well today? Because we're talking about, this taking kids through this conveyor belt, which is really what we're still doing in the public school system today. Are there threats to teaching our kids to be good thinkers?
Huge threats. And I've already mentioned one of them. So one of the biggest threats to thinking well is emotionalism, right? We live in a society that's all about, if it feels good, it must
Right.
be right. If it makes you happy, right? Don't do things that don't make you happy. Why would you do things that are hard, right? All these things. We
Right,
have all
right.
so much of the messaging that we are getting and that our kids and our families are getting is all about our feelings and feeling good and making ourselves happy, and
Mm-hmm.
and emotionalism. And it's almost like we have elevated our emotions above the truth. We've elevated our emotions. If it feels good, it must be right. If you feel like you are a boy, you must be a boy. If you feel like, right, all of these things that are not up for debate based in the emotional realm have been put up for debate in the emotional realm. And
Yeah.
it has been very hard for people to differentiate between fact and feeling. And those two things have been very intermeshed. And now we have your truth and my truth and his truth and her truth and everybody's truth that are all based on, if you dig down, how they feel. And so emotionalism is one of the biggest threats to good thinking. The other one is relativism, right? In society today, there is no absolute truth. It's all relative. Your truth is your truth, and your truth could be whatever you want it to be today, and you could change it tomorrow. And then you could have a different truth after that. But then I have my truths, and I can have my truth about this one event that happened, and you could have your truth about this one event that happened. And another relativism is, there's many ways to get to heaven, or there's many ways to get to God, or there's many ways that God speaks to us, and there's many ways that God is true, and right, all these things, all these messages that there is, it's completely taken out what God tells us in the Bible. Jesus said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Well, relativism says, Maybe that's good for you, but that's not for me.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you have no actual truth and you have nothing that is, well, then you're all over the map. And we can have somebody being confirmed for a Supreme Court justice who doesn't even know what a woman is, because
Yeah. Right.
that's relativism.
Right.
That's relativism. So those two things, emotionalism and relativism, are insidious in our society, and it keeps people, if you believe those two things to be true, if you believe that you should follow your emotions, and if you believe that there is no truth, it makes good thinking very, very difficult, because who's to say what good thinking even is, right?
Right. Exactly. Wow. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Kathy, for being with us this week. You guys can find Kathy at, tell me your website again.
Yes, filteritthrough-a-braincell.com. I am on Instagram at filteritthrough-a-braincell. My podcast is called Filter It Through a Braincell, and Kathy Gibbens on Facebook.
Awesome. All those links will be in the show notes. You guys, thank you so much for listening today. If you are blessed by the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast, we would love for you to consider a donation to the Schoolhouse Rocked ministry so that we can keep reaching families for Christ and just bringing the homeschool encouragement that we bring through the podcast. Schoolhouserocked.com. Go to the website. You'll see a donate here button and you can make a donation through there. Thank you guys for listening. We love you and we will see you back here tomorrow. Bye.
We can't just give them beliefs and say, believe it because I told you to.
Sure.
Because the moment they hit 12 or 13, they're going to say, why? And if the parent doesn't come up with a good answer, that child is lost and can be lost for a long time.
One of the things that we as parents need to understand is that Christianity is not just adding God to our thinking. To train kids up to have a true Christian worldview, we've got to understand that the Bible is a revelation from God, and it's a history book that reveals to us what we need to know to build our thinking, to have a truly Christian worldview in every area. And many people don't realize that there's ultimately only two starting points, only two foundations, God's word and man's word.